Fossilized Sports Car. The first amazing abandoned vehicle that was recently discovered is a very rare 1932 sports car that seriously surprised archaeologists while excavating a former artillery post. This happened in the United Kingdom. An archaeological crew had been needed to excavate the post before it was transformed into a new modern housing facility for the military. And it's no wonder they were so surprised by the discovery. A fossilized sports car is definitely not something that archaeologists are used to finding at a dig site. The car would have been an absolutely beautiful 1932 MG J2 midget almost 90 years ago. It was one of only 2,083 models ever made in a span of 2 years. According to the archaeologists who discovered this random car abandoned in the dirt, they believed it was used all the way until the 1960s, but was then taken apart to be repaired. For an unknown reason, the car was abandoned before repairs could be made. Then for decades, it sat in the dirt at the old artillery post until the archaeologists stumbled upon it totally by accident. This is one of the very first sports cars in history, and it's amazing to think what would have happened if it had stayed in the dirt for another 500 years. What would future archaeologists have made of such a discovery? Oldsmobile Limousine. The classic Oldsmobile is pretty much a limousine without being modified into one, and yet somebody did it anyway. The company American Quality Coach was founded in roughly 1968 when two men decided to manufacture coaches based on the original Oldsmobile Toronado from General Motors. These two fellows had an entire line of coaches they wished to build, including ambulances, hearses, and limousines, all built to mimic the Oldsmobile while being larger and more impressive. Their first product that they actually created was the airport limousine, properly titled the AQC Jetway 707. The vehicle was 28 feet long, 8.5 meters, and it had 8 doors, it seated 15 people, and it had twin rear axles. The vehicle also had skylights and an enclosed cargo area. Unfortunately, these two businessmen never got to go ahead with any of their other proposed vehicles. Their capital got tied up in producing the first line of airport limousines, which, by the way, absolutely nobody wanted to buy. Then in 1970, just 2 years after they started, the fellows went bankrupt. To this day, nobody knows how many of the AQC Jetway 707s were built. There have been estimates of between 52 and 150. One of the most recent ones discovered was back in 2015 when someone spotted a Jetway 707 sitting in a random driveway, seemingly abandoned in Nebraska. It was in rough shape and clearly had not been driven. It also might be one of the only ones left in the country. What's the strangest car you've ever ridden in? An old military Humvee? A super teched out limousine? A monster truck even? Tell me about your wildest car experiences in the comments section down below. Then remember to subscribe if you have not already, and keep your browser pointed to Talltanic for more amazing videos. Target 550 Streamliner. The Target 550 Streamliner is most certainly a unique and strange vehicle. Its only purpose in life is to break the record for the fastest wheel drive, piston-powered land vehicle of all time. It was designed with 2 supercharged Dodge engines capable of generating up to 5,000 horsepower. The current record is 470 miles per hour, but the Target 550 is determined to beat it by 80 miles per hour. It has not happened yet, but it just might. The vehicle has been in production for quite some time. The photos you've seen of it sitting in the middle of the salt flats, completely gray like the shell of a spaceship, were from several years ago before it got a proper paint job. While this vehicle has not technically been abandoned in any sense of the word, the scheduled drive to beat the record has certainly been postponed indefinitely. The car is still a fascinating piece of machinery, and we're still waiting to see if it really can break the speed record and hit the targeted 550 miles per hour, which obviously is where the vehicle gets its name from. Right now, it's likely sitting in a garage somewhere collecting dust, waiting for the big day. Abandoned cars and train tunnel. Speaking of cars that go fast, check out this collection of abandoned cars stuck inside of a collapsed train tunnel. According to thedrive.com, the tunnel was an aged piece of infrastructure in England that had been converted into a subterranean vehicle repair shop after the train stopped running. The tunnel was then abandoned in 2012 when a ceiling collapse threatened to plunge the entire tunnel into darkness. Unfortunately, the tunnel suddenly became so dangerous that everything needed to be left behind. This included the cars from the current customers, working projects, and the tools and equipment. Basically, everything inside the tunnel had to be left while the workers escaped with their lives. The tunnel was then sealed. It wasn't until recently that the Drive managed to get a hold of some of the photos of the abandoned vehicles within. The story is fascinating enough, but there are actually some pretty cool vehicles stuck inside the tunnel that will never see the light of day again. There is a Land Rover Series 2, a 1979 Lotus Elite, and even a 1992 Mitsubishi Pajero. Most of these cars have been underground for over 30 years, so they're in understandably horrible condition. But who knows, maybe this tunnel will act like a time capsule, and in 500 years, someone will open it up and find a treasure trove of classic cars still able to be fixed and driven. Soviet missile launcher. While out for a weekend adventure, a man in Russia named Oleg came upon the remnants of something fascinating. He passed into a previously unexplored area of the forest and found signs of human activity. He first encountered a rusty barbed wire fence, and daring to go beyond, he came face to face with rusted trucks from the Soviet Union, abandoned in the middle of the forest. One of these trucks was even an ancient missile launcher. Well, not necessarily a launcher, but it was definitely an army vehicle used to transport ballistic missiles. It even had a launch mechanism in the center of its own console. None of the vehicles functioned any longer, and it looked as though they had been abandoned probably since the early 90s when the Soviet Union collapsed. But still, it's definitely one of the cooler things anyone has found during an ATV ride through the forest. Lamborghini Aventador Roadster. It would be a dream come true to have a Lamborghini Aventador. In fact, just about anyone would be happy to have any kind of Lamborghini, even an old model without an engine sitting in their garage. These are some of the coolest vehicles in the world. That's what makes it so strange that a Lamborghini Aventador Roadster was found abandoned in Abu Dhabi, sitting in a parking garage covered in dust and graffiti. Judging by just how much dust is collected on the Lamborghini, it has probably been abandoned for quite some time. But this is nothing new in the United Arab Emirates. The UAE is the land of supercars, with some of the wealthiest people in the world sporting some of the most expensive cars in existence. It's no surprise that sometimes somebody can't pay the bill and they leave their Lamborghini sitting in a parking garage for someone else to deal with. It's sad, but it's true. But perhaps what's really sad is that the Lamborghini is not getting any action collecting dust. This is one car that really deserves to be driven. Abandoned trolley. Believe it or not, somebody tried to bring trolleys back to Brooklyn. It was a horribly failed experiment that ended in disaster, and now there is only one trolley left sitting on the Red Hook waterfront, tucked just out of sight behind the Beard Street warehouses. This decaying blue trolley was one of 17 decommissioned trolleys collected by two guys who started the Brooklyn Historic Railway Association. These are the two people who wanted to bring trolleys back to Brooklyn. However, the city put the kibosh on the plan before it could ever start. The rail tracks were removed, and then the road was paved over in 2004, erasing any hope of reinstating the trolleys. Most of the trolleys were then confiscated and deposited in an unknown location. The only one remaining is this blue trolley cart slowly rusting away on the waterfront. It's a 3303 Boston T Green Line car that dates back to 1951. Ukraine's space-age saucer. In the country of Ukraine, there is a giant abandoned saucer. It's located in Kiev, on the outskirts of the country's capital. It's a hidden relic not known to many people that dates back to the days of the Soviet Union. Many years ago, it was considered the most innovative structure of its kind. It's not actually a flying saucer, but from above it definitely looks like something that would come from outer space, or something that would have been used as an alien aircraft in an episode of Star Trek. It was actually a bus garage, but it was built in the likeness of a flying saucer. The garage is currently abandoned, and the story behind it is actually pretty sad. The car garage opened in 1973 and was supposed to be an enormous car garage that would service all the city of Kiev. It took 80 years to build the garage, more than 180 steel cables to hold up the roof, and it was even used in April 1986 when 70 buses stationed underneath the giant saucer were drafted to evacuate the residents of Pripyat after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. But like everything else in Eastern Europe, the end of the Soviet Union in 1991 proved to be disastrous. International routes were cancelled, Ukraine went into an economic crisis, and the lack of funds and necessity resulted in the terminal being largely abandoned, along with many of its buses. But the station is still standing. You can even visit the dead flying saucer and its dozens of abandoned buses on any trip to Ukraine. TwoWheeled Gyrocar. The story behind the Wolseley-Shalovsky Gyrocar is absolutely insane. The vehicle was originally designed by a Russian count. The whole idea behind it was that it would be a normal car with only two wheels stabilized by a gyroscope in the center. Keep in mind, this was back in the early 1900s when motor vehicles were still in their baby phase. The vehicle ended up being built by Wolseley in the United Kingdom back in 1913. Surprisingly, the car actually worked. It was not able to navigate sharp turns, but it actually stayed upright thanks to the gyroscope. Like everything else on our list though, this car just did not work out. The First World War was looming and people didn't have time to be developing wonky cars with wonky technology. It was all about military vehicles, so for whatever reason, the executives at Wolseley in London decided to dig a giant hole and throw the gyrocar into it. That's definitely one weird way of abandoning a vehicle. Then in 1938, Morris Motors, who had purchased the original company that built the gyrocar, decided to dig it out of the ground. However, the gyrocar still did not last long. After it was dug out of the ground, the top brass at the company decided it was a silly endeavor and scrapped it for parts. The American Dream Limo. The American Dream Limo epitomizes all the glory of wealth that a single person can handle. The American Dream Limousine was built by heavily modifying a 1970s Cadillac Eldorado to create the longest limousine ever. This vehicle was 100 feet, 30 meters from bumper to bumper. There were 72 seats inside and more amenities than in most people's houses. It used 2 motors and actually had to be driven by a pair of drivers. There was 1 driver in the back and 1 driver in the front. The American Dream Limo was even able to host a helicopter on the back landing pad, which doubled as a hot tub. The car was completed in 1992 and was the pinnacle of extravagance. Unfortunately, the big issue with the car was that it could only be driven in a straight line. It could not turn even a little bit. The car was made to be detachable in the midsection so that it can break into 2 vehicles for easier parking at the end of a long and straight ride. It was eventually seen as completely redundant and entirely useless and was abandoned in a warehouse in New Jersey. It wasted away until 2014 when the American Dream Limo was sent to the AutoZeum Automotive Teaching Museum in New York to be used for teaching students how to fix broken cars. Which of these amazing vehicles would you love to restore and drive yourself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thanks for watching. If you haven't already, do not forget to subscribe to Talltanic for more cool videos.